Welcome to Sherlock Mondays. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and we are continuing our biblioventure through the stories of Sherlock Holmes with a couple stories about other detectives of the same era that I'm calling Detectives of the Great Hiatus. This is episode 31, Loveday Brooke, in the black bag left on the doorstep, and joining me is a new co-host whose name was not in the credits and will be with me the next two episodes, Olivia Rutigliano. Welcome to Sherlock Mondays, Olivia.
Thank you so much for having me.
What a pleasure to have you on this show. This is going to be a lot of fun. Well,
Agreed.
this is the first of two special episodes that we're doing for Sherlock Mondays, covering the detectives of the Great Hiatus, when Sherlock Holmes left the pages of the Strand magazine after the adventure of the final problem. Magazine publishers rushed to fill the void with other detectives. Years later, readers, of course, would learn that Holmes was not dead. He did not actually go over the Reichenbach Falls with Professor Moriarty, but he was off traveling on his great hiatus, trying to escape the clutches of Professor Moriarty's gang. We will cover two stories that thrilled readers while Sherlock was away. The first is C.L. Pirkis's Loveday Brooke, and the second detective story is Arthur Morrison's Martin Hewitt. Well, if you are, and it's Pirkis Loveday Brooke tonight, Martin Hewitt on the next episode. If you are watching live right now, please like and subscribe and have fun in the live chat. Live chat's for you guys to have fun. You all know that, all you people coming back who have done this already. If you're watching the recording, hey, thanks for watching this recording, and please like and subscribe to these videos. I'd also ask you all to please consider making a donation to the Rosenbach. Thank you if you have donated or joined as a member of the Rosenbach already. That's really how we get to do this show for free, because of your support for the Rosenbach. So if you have not already donated or become a member, I invite you to do so. To go on this journey of new detectives, we have a new co-host. Olivia Rutigliano is an editor at LitHub and its outlet for suspense stories, CrimeReads. She was a contributing editor at the film magazine Bright Wall, Dark Room, has written essays for Vanity Fair, Vulture, Lapham's Quarterly, Los Angeles Review of Books, Public Books, The Baffler, Politics, Letters of Toast, Truly Adventurous, and elsewhere. She is a specialist in the history of mass entertainment from the late 19th through the 20th centuries, has a PhD, Dr. Rutigliano, that's what I should be calling you, from the English Comparative Literature and Theater at Columbia University, where she was the Marion E. Ponsford Fellow. And you are a member of the Baker Street Irregulars, Olivia. That is where I first met you.
Yes, indeed.
At BSI weekend, after you were inducted, although I had been reading your pieces in CrimeReads, and we even shared one of them on one of the stories you wrote about, and we talked about it, and I shared that piece you wrote on it. Tell us a little bit about your induction into the BSI and and what is your sobriquet? I can't remember.
My sobriquet is Lady Alicia Whittington, Whittington, from The Adventure of the Noble Bachelor.
Okay.
I think because Alicia and Olivia share a lot of letters. But I was inducted this January 2024 and was extremely honored and excited that that was the case. I had honestly, I think I've wanted to be in the BSI since I was like 14. So this was a big deal for me. But I first came to detection and lady detectives as themes also a very long time ago. My first detective, I think, was a lady detective. I think it was Nancy Drew.
Nancy Drew.
Either Wishbone. I think I told Scott Monty this on I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, but I think my first Sherlock Holmes experience was Wishbone and Sherlock Holmes. But my first detective experience in general was definitely Nancy Drew. And I've always been interested in mystery fiction, detective fiction, and how um, they've evolved so much in so many different genres, and specifically how that originated. My dissertation is about the origins of the detective in 19th century, and specifically how the detective negotiates conventions from the Victorian theater, actually. And there's this interplay between Victorian performance traditions and conventions with Victorian policing and detective uh, I don't know, styles and methodologies as they're being developed
Mhm.
in that time period.
Fascinating.
Thank you.
Give me a tidbit from that. What kind of theater convention well,
Oh,
did it influence Doyle, do you think?
yes. I mean, very much. Arthur Conan Doyle was a spectacular showman. He was a spiritualist, and spiritualism is for I'm sure everyone here knows this, but spiritualism is a fake religious slash scientific pursuit that was very
Tell
popular.
Arthur that. Arthur wouldn't define it as that. It is the
He wouldn't.
scientific pursuit
Yeah.
of,
He was so insistent that it was a scientific pursuit. He was trying to legitimize spiritualism as its own scientific discipline, the same way that Holmes is trying to legitimize deduction as its own scientific discipline. This is actually part of my dissertation. I argue that that Holmes relies on conventions of Victorian scientific, spectacular scientific showmanship. Michael Faraday and Humphrey Davy and all of these 19th century inventors, in order to legitimize their discoveries and inventions, they're putting on shows. They're all, teaching lecture halls of laymen and students and scientists alike, and they're demonstrating their machines and their technologies. And Arthur Conan Doyle was very interested in also displaying spiritualism in similar ways, including after he died, as you can learn from Daniel Stashower's wonderful biography, Teller of Tales. After he died, there was this great seance at the Royal Albert Hall in which a medium said that Arthur Conan Doyle's spirit had materialized in the space. He didn't even stop, promoting spiritualism even after he died. He was so into it. Um, so Victorian, I mean, so Doyle absolutely involves, there's a degree of the spectacular in Doyle's own life, but also Sherlock Holmes is extremely theatrical. He has, 18 different disguises in the stories, and constantly is referred to in theatrical terms. Watson says he's a better actor than John Hare, who was a popular actor on the Victorian stage. He says, the stage lost, just as science lost an acute reasoner. I'm paraphrasing that, the stage lost a great actor when he decided to become a specialist in crime.
And Doyle's writing plays himself and
Oh
really
yeah.
hoping that
Oh
works.
yeah.
He doesn't have as much success with plays, really not much at all.
Well, in the 19th century, and scholars have said this, but like in the 19th century, theatrical failure is like the most important thing fueling fiction. Like Dickens, Trollope, they're all Henry James, even they're all
Yeah.
working out their theatrical ambitions. I mean, Bram Stoker, worked at the Lyceum Theater. I mean, not that I need to tell someone who works at the Rosenbach about Bram Stoker or Henry Irving, because the Rosenbach has Bram Stoker's Dracula notes, and they're amazing.
Yeah.
You should all check it out if you're in Philly. But yes, theatrical failure or thwarted theatrical ambitions are a very, very key factor in the engine that is the Victorian novel.
C.L. Pirkis, Catherine
Yeah.
Louisa Pirkis. Where did you first come across Pirkis and Love? And was it Loveday Brooke that you came across?
Yes, it was. I came across her as in a compendium. I think it was Michelle Slung's compendium of lady detectives. Nobody really like acknowledges the fact that there were just as many female detective sleuth characters as there were male sleuth characters, and even I would venture to say more.
Hmm.
Um, at least in, the ones that are extant. There's so many lady detectives, and they're everywhere. And they're in their own standalone stories, like Revelations of a Lady Detective, which is from the early 1860s, like vastly predates any English novel featuring a detective. The She is the first one of the first detectives predating the male detectives. That's what I was trying to say. That detective character.
Mhm.
And there are like I mean, I have in my dissertation like a long, like several pages just listing all these lady detectives. And I put them together using various anthologies and going through various archives. And Loveday Brooke is one of the most famous ones. And I came across her when I was initially doing this research in 2018, when I was partially working on my PhD and partially an intern actually at the wonderful magazine Lapham's Quarterly. And RIP to Lewis Lapham, who just passed away this week.
You did a piece for them. I just put the link to it for
Thank you.
everybody.
Yes, the lady is a detective. Yeah, that was the piece. That was a piece I wrote after my internship had ended, and I was doing a lot of research because I was very interested in these characters, lady detectives, and why we don't see them. So I believe it was in Michelle Slung's one of Michelle Slung's anthologies,
Mhm.
or J.A. Kestner's. I also took a class in taught by the amazing professor Caroline Wrights, who's at CUNY. She taught a class on Victorian periodicals, and she's so awesome. She's so legit that there weren't enough people signed up in this class, and there were, a smattering of us from various universities in New York. We have like a consortium. I wasn't a CUNY student, but she just ran it as an independent study and didn't even get paid for it. She just like did it anyway, and it was amazing.
Awesome.
And we looked at a lot of magazines like Ludgate Monthly, which feature lady detectives. Loveday Brooke was never one of my favorite sleuths because she's not really performative. And I was very interested in the sleuths who had the lady detectives specifically who had theatrical backgrounds, which there's so many of them. But Loveday Brooke is really interesting, and we'll get into all the reasons why. But she's really interesting because she's not treated the way some of the other lady detectives are. In this period, if you're a lady detective character in fiction, chances are you have arrived at that profession because you have encountered some degree of destitution or hardship. Your
Mhm.
husband has died. Your father has died. There's some great misfortune that is requiring you to seek a job, and you find your way to detection because you have brains, but you wouldn't be doing it if your household had been as intact as it had been previously, or if you had not fallen upon hard times. Loveday Brooke, however, becomes a detective kind of just because she's good at it. She realizes.
Uh-huh.
Um, she finds her. Yeah, it's mentioned in the beginning of the story that she sort of wound up friendless and somewhat penniless, and needed to find a job, but then found detection and worked her way up through the ranks
Yeah.
because she was good at it. She did not, like many of these detectives, use that as a means to hold herself over until finding someone to marry or finding another way, like becoming a governess, finding a more legitimate legitimate avenue for revenue, or
Mhm.
a sustainable living situation. She stays in it because she's good at it, and she gravitates to it because she's good at it. And there's no justification needed for why she continues, and that's extremely rare in this canon.
Mhm.
I
Is
like.
is the I mean she's a bit I mean she goes against the grain. She's not she's not necessarily following the rules that women are normally supposed to follow in this. Does this also reflect on the author as well, on Pirkis?
Yes, very much so. Catherine Louisa Pirkis was a very iconoclastic thinker. I wish she became a figure like, George Eliot, or Elizabeth Barrett Browning, or even Christina Rossetti, a figure who was remembered more in modern times in the 21st
Mhm.
century, because she was so incredibly progressive. Loveday Brooke was actually a character she wrote later in her life. She was well into her 50s. But she also had this whole side career in addition to writing really interesting novels about women's experiences and stories about women's experiences. She also helped found Britain's National Canine Defense League, which is known today as the Dogs Trust. It was the largest national rescue organization in the UK. And she and her husband were like very passionate anti-vivisectionists. They were lobbying to end animal cruelty. She also featured extremely productive representations of women, working women, the working class in general, and also criminals. As we can tell in this novel, Loveday Brooke is a character who enters the household as a detective, but does so in the guise of a servant, and does it to vindicate a servant, who is, wrongfully accused, etc. So the priority of both Loveday Brooke and Pirkis's lives or missions is to be a champion for those who are not able to defend themselves, or the disenfranchised, or the weak, or the literal animal in the Victorian ecosystem.
I'll have some thoughts on that detective, point of view, today when we're in the story too, and how this is different than what we usually get with Sherlock Holmes,
Mm-hmm.
and refreshing because of that.
Yeah, totally.
All righty. Well, I didn't send out a Sherlock tale for everyone, but I did come up with one just today. I just came up with something that I'm calling the Loveday Brooke. And it's a cocktail. It's one of those, it's like a real cocktail, alcohol plus alcohol plus alcohol, because that's what I like. And it is rye whiskey, um, um, like a couple ounces of rye whiskey, and then like a half an ounce of sweet vermouth, half an ounce of Campari, and then a half an ounce of Benedictine. And I also muddled some mint in it. There's a mint sprig there too. Well, there's cherries in the bottom because it's a whiskey drink. It needs cherries. And I'm calling it the Loveday Brooke because I just am. I don't have a backstory and a way to piece it together. I just wanted a good whiskey drink for this. I made sure that I like Loveday Brooke isn't the kind of detective that I need some kind of delicate, drink for the ladies. She'd have a whiskey, I would think.
Yeah,
If
she'd be tossing it down. She's legit.
All righty. Should we get on with our story?
Let's do it.
We have shared a PDF of a facsimile of the black bag left on a doorstep as it was originally published in February 1893 in Ludgate Monthly. You can download it at the Rosenbach's Sherlock Mondays page. And yes, this was published in February 1893. That means it's not technically a story from the Great Hiatus, but people were still reading Sherlock Holmes when these stories are being published. And it's a whole series. So I think she writes 6 in 1893, and then she writes one more in February 1894. So that one, the last one, Missing, it's called, is in the hiatus. And then the book, The Experiences of Loveday Brooke, Lady Detective, is published in the following year when Sherlock is gone. So, but I think she still fulfills that role of this is a detective, whether it's in book form or not, that people are turning to when they don't have any more Sherlock. Ludgate Monthly was a family magazine, much like The Strand was, in that it went for this audience that everybody in the family could read from it. It was going to be a miscellany of fiction and stories and illustrations, and even the advertisements. It began in May 1891. The Strand begins in January 91. And I kind of wonder if Ludgate, as other magazines, wasn't also oh my gosh, look at this market that the Strand is getting. And they jumped in and tried to get some of that market too, especially because the Strand is 6 pence and the Ludgate Monthly was only 3. So it's a way of kind of getting in and competing with the Strand magazine. Lasts for a few years, and then in 94, I think, it becomes the Ludgate Illustrated Monthly, where they're really emphasizing the illustrations. And it goes on for several years, but it doesn't nearly have the staying power that the Strand wound up having. But then again, no magazines did that. So this is so it's published. I actually, when I had sent this out, Olivia, I gave everybody a PDF. The byline is actually a little different from what I shared than what was in the actual magazine, and I didn't realize that. I created that PDF out of this Rivals of Sherlock Holmes book that I have. This isn't one of the Hugh Green ones. This is the one by Alan, what is it, Shepard? But that's not Alan Russell, but that's not even Alan Russell. I forget who it is. It's like somebody else. He just used that name for these. He's some famous British publisher. But in these stories, you get all these are facsimiles. So I took it from this to make that PDF. But actually, I'll just share it. The because I did find online the volume for the Ludgate Monthly stories that this is in, and here it is. And this is all the same up here. The Experiences of Loveday Brooke, Lady Detective. It's just this byline that's a little different than what I share. But let's just look at this right off the bat. I find this interesting, Olivia, knowing that readers up till this point have been reading The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, and every story is that it says The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, or the adventure of, I'm sorry, whatever it is that week, the adventure of the Speckled Band. All the stories were the adventure of, and here it's the experiences. Is that are they going for like letting the audience know this is something different? I don't think that's a gendered word, but or maybe I'm wrong, but it's definitely, this isn't we're not telling you this is an adventure story. Does that make it less male, like less male detective, do you think?
That's a very interesting point, Ed. As you were saying that, I was trying to think of all of the different lady detective like anthologies that I could come up with. We have Revelations of a Lady Detective. Some of them are called simply like The Female Detective. Um, or have titles like, Mr. Bazalgette's Agent or something like that. But then we have things like Experiences and Revelations, and I think certainly the lady detective genre is considered a sort of adventure story because it's just as fictitious as something in the Lost World or H. Rider Haggard or even Sherlock Holmes, because women could not be detectives.
Yeah.
Women were absolutely not allowed in the constabulary until the beginning of the 20th century, let alone the detectives division. And yet a lot of these stories have fantasies about women working for like all female branches of the police department or being hired as special police agents, as well as working for private agents like Loveday Brooke does. So I think I think a lot of these stories are already sort of considered adventurous or fantastical, but the titles are taking that for granted. Like if this is a woman, it's already an adventure. We're instead going to be focusing on something that seems a little more intuitive or a little more personal than say a little more like aggressively swashbuckling or masculine coded. I do
Mhm.
think adventure is a more masculine word. I think we also get some books called Adventures of a Lady Detective, but I have to double check. I have it in my notes here, and I'll flip through. Um,
She's
but the
also, go ahead.
Yeah, you go. No, you
I was
ahead.
going to say she's also C.L. Pirkis, and early in her career
Right.
she was publishing under her name Catherine, but I'm sorry, it's Catherine, right?
Oh, yes, it is. Yes. And this also, Catherine with a C, obviously. And this also is different than some of the women writers of these stories too. I mean, there are four other female authors of mainstream detective fiction from this time period, and they all have different style. They have different presentations of their names, which I think reflects there's this negotiation about like the level of so-called like femininity that's expected from these characters. As I want to talk about later, I think the stories like Loveday Brooke destabilize notions that we as 21st century like denizens have of Victorian conventions, because I think the Victorian rigidity or the rigidity that's ascribed to the Victorian era is actually sort of an anachronistic and not real. Like there was
Mhm.
a way more fluid and flexible society in the Victorian world, in many cases even more flexible than ours today in America. But like the presentation of these female authors varies. So you have writers like C.L. Pirkis, then you have L.T. Mead, who created the Florence Cusack mysteries, as well as a series of novels called The Sorceress of the Strand, which was about a villainous beautician named Madame Sarah,
And
who's also
Sarah, yeah, I like those.
yeah, exactly. And the hero of those is a male detective figure named Dixon Druce.
Nobody
But
cares about him though. We all care
no,
about Madame
no,
Sarah.
Madame Sarah is incredible. He is window dressing. It's, you need to have someone investigating the, flamboyant female criminal mastermind. So you have this bland guy. So you have L.T. Mead, but then you also have Anna Catherine Green, who wrote the Amelia Butterworth and Violet Strange mysteries. She's an American author, as well as male detective stories about a detective named Ebenezer Grice. And then we have Beatrice Heron Maxwell, who was a writer who wrote a character named Molly Delamere.
Mhm.
And although obviously, none of these lady detective stories are truly autobiographical. Beatrice Heron Maxwell was similarly widowed, as was her heroine, and had to turn to writing to sustain herself, just as her widowed heroine turned to detection. So there's an interesting parallel there. But those two women, Anna Catherine Green and Beatrice Heron Maxwell, went by their own names. And then you have a writer named Mrs. George Corbett, Mrs. George Burgoyne Corbett. She doesn't even have her own name. She's the writer of a book called, okay, here we go, Adventures of a Lady Detective. There we go. That's the
Yeah.
adventures I was thinking of, which was published, I have it right here, which was published in 1890, featuring a detective named Dora Bell. A lot of the detectives are named Dora, and I want to talk about that in another conversation. Nothing to do with Loveday Brooke. Loveday Brooke is a way more interesting name. But yeah, there are a lot of them named Dora. But I think that varied presentation of female names suggests that there's this negotiation of how to present a female author, just as there's a negotiation about how to present a female detective.
Yeah, the Andrea has a comment in the live chat about maybe they're not called adventurous because that might make her an adventuress, which is could have negative
Very different. Yeah.
connotations. So,
Irene Adler is an
or at least
adventuress.
yes, or at least different
Yeah.
connotations for people. But the other thing I want to mention about this byline is that the it also says author of Lady Lovelace, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's an establishment of this is an author who has published other things. So like this isn't just somebody new, people. This is an established author. But it's also the one that either they pick Lady Lovelace because it was her most popular book, maybe, or because it has a name that might attract women. Because I really think the Ludgate Monthly magazine
It's a
kind of,
family magazine. It's a
but
family magazine.
and it also kind of becomes a women's magazine after a year or so. There's a lot of stories and features in it that really seem to cater to female readership more so than the Strand. I think so.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you. Can I speak to this for just a second?
Yeah, I'm gonna stop this share. Yeah.
Okay. So what you were saying about how Ludgate Monthly was a family magazine, but it sort of had a more women focus is true. To such an fascinating extent. The scholar Elizabeth Carolyn Miller, who writes a lot about lady detectives and magazine periodical culture and the sort of like lower literature, popular literature of the Victorian period, notes that although Ludgate Monthly was a family magazine, it's not out of the ordinary that that such a publication would be writing about this sort of like very gray area detective character. Loveday Brooke is referred to almost androgynously. She has a somewhat androgynous name. She's described as being like not pretty, not ugly, sort of the writer says that she presents rather than a series of qualities, a series of negotiations. So there's this maybe way to potentially queer her character, maybe to read a sort of ambiguity that can facilitate a certain kind of slipping in and out of various archetypes or prescribed societal norms, but also it underscores something that is really fascinating, which is that Ludgate Monthly ran advertisements from tons and tons of different kinds of companies, and some of the companies were advertising abortifacients, abortion pills too, not explicitly, but with delicate language that could allow a knowledgeable reader or someone who is looking for a sort of like legitimate cure, looking for a way to get an abortion, could read between the lines and understand. So this points out two things. One, that these magazines represented a different publishing landscape than what we might think of in the Victorian period as being like very prim and proper. And if this is a family magazine, like absolutely not. We can't feature anything that's at all taboo or deals with women's bodies. But it also so it reminds us that there's this lack of rigidity, but it also underscores that there's this like complicated way that women's experiences are rising to the level of like mass consumer
Mhm.
attention and being treated in a public way, which is very interesting, especially when we look at it with look at it alongside a character like Loveday Brooke, who isn't, a widow looking for a way to make an income. She's a professional woman looking to make money, and she discovers she's good at being a detective, and that's justification enough. So there are all these progressive and modern themes that are sort of interwoven that complicate Ludgate Monthly's existence as we know it today.
Fascinating. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Um, the and I want to warn people, the lady, let me do that. There you go. Now it's clear. It's not you restart your video and it
Oh,
clears the blurs.
little blurry.
The Lady Lovelace, and I'm trying to figure it because I don't have a copy of this, and I'm looking it up, and they one site literally says the book was about Ada Lovelace, the brilliant, mathematician, daughter of Lord Byron.
Yes.
And I'm like, it is? And I gotta find a copy of it. It's not. It's completely not.
Not?
Somebody just put that on I think an Amazon listing for it. So it
It's
is.
like I was straight up about to be like, yes, let's buy this book.
Yep, me too. But it's not. I'm thinking like especially 1890, somebody's writing a novel of Ada Lovelace. It's not. It's about something else.
Go. That's
It's a very
disappointing. Although,
traditional kind of novel for its time.
if there
But
were anyone to write this novel, it might be Catherine Louisa
there you
Pirkis.
go.
Yeah. So, um, fast.
All right, let's get to the story finally. I'm so roundabout getting where we need to get to. It begins. It's a big thing, said Loveday Brooke, addressing Ebenezer Dyer, chief of the well-known detective agency in Lynch Court, Fleet Street. Lady Cathro has lost 30,000 pounds worth of jewelry, if the newspaper accounts are to be trusted. Everything's established right there, right? Loveday Brooke, and then Ebenezer Dyer, the chief of the detective agency, where they're situated. It places them in London. I didn't look up if there was an actual Lynch court, but there's clearly a Fleet Street. And this is the crime. A crime was committed, so there's no wasting time here, as Doyle usually did with Sherlock stories. It's like, oh, I decided to look out the window at Baker Street and the road, and there's always this a lovely, which what I love, lovely setup to a Sherlock story. But this first Loveday Brooke story is bang, we're right there, and I'm pretty sure they're all this way. The ones that I've read, the
They're
first
very, very, yes, they're
five,
very.
we're right on to the what's going on at the beginning. One of them is even mid-conversation. The one I just read is like mid-conversation. The story starts between her and Dyer about they were already talking about the case. So, and it is we find out a country house robbery, and even called that. I would think that that's a term that probably came about from the golden age of detective stories in the 20th century. But no, they called them when you robbed, this big house out in the country, they called them country house robberies then. And of course, it's mentioned that it's an unusual crime right off the bat, that it's unusual for different reasons. There's a weak point of the house, this window. We even get a picture of it, and it's, for me, there's this weak point of the house. This is the Death Star thermal exhaust port of Craigen Court, which is where they're at, because it even has a ventilator, and this window is what enables the criminals to break into the house. And I love how it's even like this is the first illustration of the story here too, like the window on the ground floor. So we get it right off the bat. And you can see the ventilator right up here. So this is where you got to shoot to get well, Luke could do it because he's used to shooting womp rats back home. So,
It is 16.
but right there you can this is the window that they broke into. So I like this setting up of the story. This never happens in a Sherlock story. Like, ooh, look, here's a piece of the crime. This is where it happened. We'll get another shot later of the safe, like in the wall. This is for, I mean, it's decorative, but it's for the reader. It's for to situate the reader in that world. But most of the illustrations in this I find are not as dramatically composed to, kind of create a scene as Paget used to do.
But they're very rough too. I mean, like faces aren't nearly as in focus, and it's very sketchy, literally, as if, someone quickly drew them and submitted them, as opposed to Paget's almost painting like line drawings.
Yeah, and it's Bernard Hyam is the young artist who did these. He's in his early 20s. He had illustrated for the Idler magazine, Windsor magazine, a few others in the 1890s. And then as far as I know, it just like disappears. I don't know if he continued after that. He actually illustrated a Richard Marsh novel, The Strange Wooing of Mary Bowler. Marsh is better known for The Beetle, which is a horror novel from 1897. That's the one that outsold Dracula.
Not me to cut you off.
The Beetle was a book everybody was reading that year, not necessarily Dracula, but this is before then, and Bernard Hyam is the illustrator for these. Let us stop there. But we find out that that window is where the thieves get in, and right away they assume your suspicion, I suppose, center upon the servants. Loveday Brooke says, which I like, that she's saying at the Dyer, like, you're saying that the servants probably have done that.
Big surprise.
Of course.
And the servant who is an immigrant also.
Yes. But
a then reviled country.
Let's just say first, as classist as it sounds, the servants do know everything in the house. Like, they are easy to point out because they have access to everything. And it's the scary thing for, people in the upper class, is the servants have such access to their lives and know everything about them. The French maid, and yes, you're right, foreign too. She's a French maid, and she has access to she has the key to the safe. Stephanie Delcroix. And she even admits that instead of locking up the jewels that night, she went downstairs to chat with the servants because this is when her mail would usually come. So she doesn't lock up the jewels as she's supposed to right away. I like this, Olivia, because Brooke breaks in right away and she says, she was in the habit of thus running down to inquire for the letters. So she's right away notices like, yeah, okay. So that's an okay, like, that doesn't make her, I'm not suspicious because of that action. And, but Dyer is, things look very black against the girl. And of course she's French, right?
Despicable.
She becomes theatrical in action and then goes off into hysterics once more.
I want to talk about the theatrically coded villainy later on, but
all that is quite français, said Loveday. So they and it's Brooke's job now. This is when we get into it's what she's going to be hired to do now is to go in and pretend she's one of the servants. I should have mentioned too that she also there's possible lovers that the girl may have, that Dyer mentions. And he thinks that it was probably one of her lovers that masterminded this, and she just kind of assisted. And they want to send down, the Scotland Yard wants him to send down one of the shrewdest and most clear-headed of my female detectives. And he says, you may take it as a compliment if you like. And and then we start to get into the description of who she is and her life. She is a little over 30 years of age and could be best, I love this, right? It could best be described in a series of negations. That's
Negations, not
interesting.
negotiations. Sorry.
That's
said
so interesting that, to negatively describe her, she's not tall, not short, not dark, not fair, neither handsome nor ugly, nondescript. That's a fascinating way to say that she's can blend in, right? So this is the way a spy should look, or a detective, really, because you don't want anybody to notice you. All the good-looking spies and detectives, somebody's going to notice you right off the bat. So
many lady detectives are coded as being extremely beautiful. I mean, like there's a character named Hagar Stanley. She works in a pawn shop, and um she given this extremely exoticized description of her beauty. I mean, like so many lady detectives are striking and have to don disguises, but Loveday Brooke is herself sort of a blank cipher.
yeah, and not this, and it doesn't have to be glamorous. I mean, this reminds me of Charlotte Bronte describing Jane Eyre.
Yes,
That Jane's
yes.
very plain,
She
and
is.
and of course, other people see beauty in her, and this is Charlotte Bronte's point. It's like, come on, it's the heroine's not always going to be this, gorgeous, person. This is normal, is what
Right.
I'm trying to convey here. And Pirkis is doing this, I think, with Loveday Brooke as well. Even dressed all in black. And she has one feature, and she droops her eyelids, dropping her eyelids over her eyes until a line of eyeball showed and appeared looking out at the world through a slit instead of through a window. Yeah, is that it? Is that the pose?
Yeah. Modeling it for you. I'm like,
um she's looks at the world differently, in a sense, right?
yeah.
Let's look at that picture too, just because it's the first illustration of her that Hyam draws. And here she is seated at a desk, elbow, hand on chin. Just the thoughtful pose, I guess, too. Um, but all in black, kind of ordinary. This isn't an exotic looking picture. A habit of dropping her eyelids. I wonder if that was, I wonder, if that was, I wonder what the instructions for the illustrator were for this. Like, make
Yeah.
sure we want to get a portrait of her, and we want a portrait of her early on in the story. Although I think it's interesting, it's not even the first. First, we get the window.
I assume the illustrations also would have come from the publisher more than that Pirkis had
Oh
in.
yeah, it definitely wouldn't have come from Pirkis. Yeah, the magazine's definitely dictating this. So the editor and art director of the magazine. Well, now is when we get some of this description you were already describing about Loveday Brooke and her place in the world. She was penniless and all but friendless, but realized that what read that little paragraph there, some 5 or 6 years. Do you have that?
I'll get it right now. I'm flipping. What page do you have? Sorry.
I don't know. On my
Middle.
it's
One
four,
underneath.
the top of 3 or 4, top of 4 on my PDF.
Okay.
It's some 5 or 6 years previously.
Got it. For wait, I think I got the wrong one.
By a jerk.
Yeah, 5 or 6 years, but not previously. That's very interesting. There's a slight variation in the text.
Weird.
Weird. Okay, well, this is what I've got.
Yeah.
For 5 or 6 years, she had drudged away patiently in the lower walks of her profession. Then, chance, or to speak more precisely, an intricate criminal case had introduced her to the notice of the experienced head of the flourishing detective agency in Lynch Court. He quickly enough found out the stuff she was made of and threw her in the way of better class work. Work, indeed, that brought increase of pay and of reputation alike to him and to Loveday. Ebenezer Dyer was not as a rule given to enthusiasm, but he would at times wax eloquent over Miss Brooke's qualifications for the profession she had chosen.
That is fascinating. I think there may have been editing in the book publication
Yeah. I think
um,
there's slight variations.
that I was not aware of at all.
Fascinating. Well,
Um,
so I have an explanation for this because we are reading it together. We're reading the story that appeared in Ludgate Monthly. I am reading the book, The Experiences of Loveday Brooke,
so
Lady,
then she did edit it that, which I was not aware of at all.
which appears to have been edited. This features 41 illustrations, which is how you can tell that this is a scan from the General Historical Collections of the British Library. They have original copies of
Mhm.
Ludgate Monthly. British Library publishes really wonderful like actual books, crime editions, often edited by people like Martin Edwards, but they also sometimes publish facsimile editions of the books that they have there. So this is not an edition of Ludgate Monthly's magazine. This is instead a compilation of the stories
Yeah.
themselves, arranged as a book. And you can tell because it says with 41 illustrations, which refers to as many in
Yeah.
the book. Yeah.
What you read too was a more succinct
Mhm.
telling of what we have here in the original, which was some 5 or 6 years previously, by a jerk of fortune's wheel, Loveday had been thrown upon the world penniless and all but friendless. Marketable accomplishments she had none, so she had forthwith defied convention and had chosen for herself a career that had cut her off sharply from her former associates and her position in society. For
Yeah.
5 or 6 years, she drudged away patiently in the lower walks of her profession. Then chance, or to speak more precisely, an intricate criminal case threw her in the way of the experienced head of the flourishing detective agency in Lynch Court. And then it goes on. There's even more. So
Fascinating.
it sounds like yours is also more succinct than this.
It's a little more succinct. My some 5 or 6 years previously is on a different page. It's on the previous page. So I also just cut it in half, and I read the second half. But yes, it does seem to be a deed more succinct anyway. It's fascinating. Um,
They so this is a detective who has made her name doing this work and then was able to do it do it even more, get a better position with this, Dyer Detective Agency because of her skill. Not just because she's a woman, right? And she could help him in that way, or necessarily because she's got certain womanly skills, which usually happens in detective stories, right?
yes. Well, she is given this a little bit. I'll just because later in the next paragraph, when he's defending her to like this, in this sort of straw man argument against why he has her in such a high position, he says, I don't care twopence halfpenny whether she is or is not a lady. I only know she is the most sensible and practical woman I have ever met. In the first place, she has the faculty, so rare among women, of carrying out orders to the very letter. In second
Mhm.
place, she has a clear, shrewd brain, unhampered by any hard and fast theories. Thirdly and most important item of all, it seems to be a typo in the original edition, she has so much common sense that it amounts to genius, positively to genius, sir. But if you notice, the she's referred to originally as the most sensible and practical woman. So woman is a qualifier. It's not person. She's not the most,
Yeah.
detective that I have. There is an acknowledgement that she still belongs to this class of people, but she exists as a sort of exception to women because she has these extremely rational skills. And in the chapter in my dissertation, I decode the sort of like inductive, intuitive qualities that women are described as rational behaviors. But here we're told that these sort of womanly qualities are against the traditional qualities you would expect of a detective. And it says, he says, in the first place, she has the faculty, so rare among women, of carrying out orders to the very letter. And that is very interesting because that is not a quality that says anything about thinking for oneself or
Mhm.
using one's brain. That's carrying out orders.
Yeah.
And this also suggests, maybe a subversive reading of women also. The idea that, women do have ideas, and the problem with having women as one's foot soldiers is that they have their own ideas and they can't simply take orders like, you know, pawns or troops in low level positions. So she has this quality that's a masculine coded quality that actually seems less impressive, but it is that masculine coded quality that is allows her to be a better detective underling,
Yeah.
worker for him,
Well,
which, you know, a position of subservience we might normally ascribe to women, but in this, they're reversed.
and we will see how she follows orders.
Yes, we will.
Because she tends to have a comment about them always.
Yeah.
And also that what then we also learn right away that she doesn't acquiesce immediately, which is what I noticed right off the bat. There were occasions on which they were wont, so to speak, to snarl at each other. This is Dyer and Brooke, and such an occasion is now. And it says, and he's trying to get her going here, and then she interrupts. He's like, "Did you see this newspaper ad? You know, to be let unfurnished." And they and or in the newspaper it says to be let unfurnished, because then there's something else you'll interrupt them with later. And he says, yes, that's what happened. And he says to get out your notebook, and then here she's stopping him. Don't be in a hurry. I want to know now if you've seen this. And she pulls out another newspaper article, which is about a singular discovery of the a black leather bag or portmanteau found on the doorstep of a house with all this clerical things in it, a collar and a necktie, a church service, but also a suicide note. The fatal day has arrived, and I've made the damnable sin of gambling, but I'm the son of a noble woman. I won't sign my name. And that Brooke's immediately asking him, like, what about this? And he stares at her in utter blank astonishment. I think this is perhaps what we get for the other illustration here too. The two of them together, she's showing him the thing and he's staring, and they look very adversarial here. He's they're both they both have their serious face on. That this is how she's going about doing her job, regardless of what he's telling her. She's already doing, and we'll learn later that she's already solved the case before she even got to the office.
She's got it right. Like, it's amazing. She's amazing.
But I like this adversarial picture here, even between the two of them, that as much as he is impressed by her, she's and says that she follows orders, it seems like in the text she just gets her way anyway. She's dictating how this is going to go on by letting him know that this is how I'm investigating it without giving him the details, like Sherlock would do. Like, Sherlock's not going to tell you what he's doing. And so she shares that with him about the black bag. And clearly she thinks this is connected, but he doesn't. And obviously, I don't think the reader can make any kind of connection here. She asks, might in some way connect this discovery with the robbery? And he looks at her like, what? Like, he has no idea what she's talking about.
Crazy.
And then she handles him though here. And then she says, oh, very well, said Loveday calmly. I fancy you might like to talk it over. That was all. Give me my sailing orders. So she has this way of kind of dismissing the men, and she'll do this later with Bate as well, Inspector Bate. And I can't help but think women might at the time might have read this story differently than men might have read this. That women could hear a tone in her answering their mansplaining,
Right.
as the story goes on.
She already has the case solved. She knows exactly what she's presenting to him, but she's aware that she doesn't necessarily have the evidence either. So if he's complaining, he's a character who's described as being so truculent and having so much bluster. She knows how to deal with this, and she's just like, fine, if you're not going to listen to me, she says like, I thought you might find
Yeah.
a connection in here. And he's like, what are you talking about? And then she's like, well, if you don't see it, you don't see it. She sees it. Now she's going to go make him see it. So this
Yeah.
isn't a story about her solving the case. This is a story about her beating her male employer who has dismissed her deductive abilities at the get-go. And she's like, fine, I'll show you. Now I
And
gotta go do all this to prove
and honestly, I mean, for him, and he lets her do it. He's
yeah,
given her this leeway because the results clearly that he understands that she already gets.
right. And she speaks his language, literally. Give me
Yeah.
my sailing orders as you say. Like, not only is she going to follow his instructions, even though she knows the answer already, she's even explaining this to him in his own parlance. Like,
What's interesting too here is that we almost have this story's like Watson's in control. It's like
yeah,
the Sherlock Dyer doesn't understand, and the assistant,
right.
has all
Now
the answers
Friday.
and has figured it out.
Right, yeah. I mean, it would be great if this dynamic played out between Holmes and Watson. That would be so amusing, but
Yeah. You get that in some adaptations, and that where Watson is really on top of things, and Holmes just isn't realizing it.
I'm a Watson truther. I love when Watson gets to show that he's actually smart. So
Yeah. So, which he is frequently, but
the doctor.
he's also dim frequently. Doyle really does add that in there in some.
Well, does Watson add that in there? Because Watson, you know, Watson's a carnival barker. He's like, this guy can solve anything. You know,
I don't know anything.
down in the process. Yeah. Anyway, moving back to Loveday Brooke.
Her job is she's going to portray the niece of the housekeeper, Mrs. Williams. Jane Smith will be her name.
And then he's like, write that down. Like, she can remember Jane Smith.
Better write it
Not
down.
hard.
And she's going to get to wear her blue spectacles. So she's going to look really cool too, interacting with the servants. I like that. Blue spectacles.
Should have brought my blue spectacles.
You'll find this often in 19th century stories, blue spectacles, green spectacles. This is just literally because people's eyesight wasn't as good, and that would help them with the light in certain places see things better. It's a way of almost corrective lenses in a sense, because not everybody's going to go out and get glasses. Is to just get different shades of light that would make you see a little bit better. But here it seems that almost as if he says that you've injured your eyes, so wear your blue spectacles. Oh, that's because that's what the niece is supposed to be. So
right.
It's a disguise. It's part of the disguise here.
That's he's like, here, look, you get to wear a disguise. You're going to you're fully concealing yourself as someone with glasses, which, as we all know from Clark Kent, works perfectly effectively as a disguise.
And she and there's no need for her to talk to the Sir George or Lady Cathro, just the servants. And then he mentions Bates from Scotland Yard. We'll know that you're in the house. Bates from Scotland Yard is the lead detective on this. And she asks if he's uncovered anything, and he says yes. One of the girl's lovers, a young farmer, the name of Holt. But he's above suspicion, and it doesn't matter. It's like they're so quick to say this doesn't matter, and she finds a use for this. So as part of the story. Oh, and I love this that they have a cipher that she'll telegraph in a cipher to him that they can read. I like that. That's because you don't get that in Sherlock. He doesn't have a cipher with Watson. He should, but
oh, he absolutely should. Oh my God.
Well, she takes the train, and before she goes off, let me take a moment to thank all of you for watching this episode. As a nonprofit organization, the Rosenbach Museum and Library depends on the generosity of friends and supporters like you to keep programs like this free and accessible to thousands of fellow Sherlockians worldwide. I hope you'll consider supporting the Rosaback and Sherlock Mondays by donation, which you can do so at our website, or you could become a member. Membership gives you free museum admission, discounts on programs and courses, exclusive invitations to member-only events. You can learn more about how to become a member on our website, and part of membership is early access to program and course registration. There's lots of great in-person and online programs. If you live in the Philadelphia area, I'm actually giving a presentation on our Sherlock and mystery-related materials on August 8th, 2024. This is a behind the bookcase program called Elementary, Detecting Sherlock Holmes and Other Consulting Detectives. And I will share our manuscript of Doyle's Adventure of the Empty House, our first editions of memoirs and Hound of the Baskerville, but also share first edition of Edgar Allan Poe's collection of tales, which include Murders in the Rue Morgue, Charles Dickens's Bleak House. And for these programs, behind the bookcase programs, we bring you into Dr. Rosenbach's library on Delancey Place in Philadelphia, and we put the books and manuscripts in your hands. It's for a very small group only, 12 people for each of these behind the bookcase, but there are actually still a few spots open for this one. So you can register at rosenbach.org and you can meet me. It'll be fun. I'll enjoy it.
I recommend it. I recommend meeting Ed Pettit.
It will be fun. And you know the Rosenbach well, Olivia, from your time in Philadelphia as well, right?
Yes,
You visited us. And
college there, yeah. I went to Rosenbach University. No,
there you go.
because all my papers involved me coming to the Rosenbach to do research.
Dracula, yeah, and all kind of, yeah.
Irving, yeah, no, it was a great time.
We also have our fall Biblioventures series, Monsters and Ghosts, is open for registration now. If you're not already registered, we'll be covering Robert Louis Stevenson's The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde for 6 episodes. And then we're going to do Charles Dickens's A Christmas Carol for 6 episodes. You can register for that at rosenbach.org. And remember, Sherlock Mondays will continue as Sherlock Monthly beginning in November of this year. Once a month on a Saturday afternoon, live, we'll cover the rest of the Sherlockian canon with a different co-host every month, one story at a time. If you're already registered for Sherlock Mondays, you'll receive an email about how to watch Sherlock Monthly. And that's all the things I'm going to tell you about right now. So lots of fun things to do. The fall schedule will be released for courses and programs next month. So you can see that there. Next month being August 2024. Lots of fun things to do. But right now, we're still talking about the black bag left on the doorstep. Loveday Brooke gets on the train and she pulls out her little book of the Reciter's Treasury, published at the low price of 1 shilling, which is specially designed to meet the requirements of third-rate amateur reciters at penny readings. I did look this up and I was wondering, like, there was actually a Reciter's Treasury published after this, but so there wasn't an actual with that actual title, but there were plenty of books like this, which would have poems or speeches, and some of them would be tragic, some of them would be comic, and they're for, presenting, and people would use these if they had to do something, especially young people were asked to do things for school or certain affairs. So this is the book she pulls out, which will become important later because it winds up being the book that keys her into. What the reader of the story for the first time doesn't see is how she's she's letting us know the clues and how she solved this already. The first was the other newspaper story about the singular discovery in the black bag. This Reciter's Treasury is the second clue that has led her to solve this case, or actually she solved it, and now she's just figuring out the details. She's finding the things that she needs to know.
Making her case.
Yeah. She meets Bates from Scotland Yard, and of course, he thinks it is just a simple case. Of course, it's the French maid, and then he has some absurd logic here that she because she has lovers, because she's so pretty,
Yeah.
she must have lots of lovers. So that means one of them is probably a criminal.
Volume really that's the only thing he's got.
There
More
is
volume.
no logic to that, whatever. But he says, that's plain as a pike staff, isn't it? And she says, just as plain.
Just as plain. She just, she is so happy to let this man talk
Yep.
himself silly.
And
Sure.
then it says, Bates felt encouraged to proceed. She encouraged him by just agreeing with him, just as plain. But clearly, she doesn't agree with him at all. Especially once you get on a reread, you realize she didn't agree with him at all. She knows what happened. She knows he's wrong. He's kind of wrong. Actually has a kernel of something there that exists.
Mostly wrong.
But when I want to hit at the end of the story, because I think there's still a question about Stephanie's involvement that doesn't get answered.
Oh.
Or I missed something. She he thinks it's her, and he goes on more about how it was her, and they'll clearly, catch the person doing it. They And then he tells her about young Holt, who has a farm near there, and he was one of her lovers, but he's been thrown over. And Loveday could not. Oh, I'm sorry. And then they see him. Holt comes, and that's why he says, "Here comes Holt." As they're walking along in his carriage, and he says, "Oh, that's one of her young lovers." And Loveday could not but admire his frank, honest expression of countenance.
And that's women's intuition right there.
Yeah, isn't it?
Absolutely nothing logical about this. She just has this intuitive response. So even though she's like disqualified as not having certain qualities that are normally ascribed to female detectives, all lady detectives are given this intuitive ability. But so is Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, this is a
Right.
Sherlock trait too. He can
Right.
look at you and read you.
In lady detective stories, the same things that the male detectives like Sherlock Holmes are doing are referred to as womanly intuitive, like women's intuition sort of qualities. Loveday Brooke does it, and it's still one of those things, but it's not specifically called out because she's a woman. She's just able to do it because all detectives are able to do it. So it's a very interesting moment that perhaps unconsciously plays with this like taboo of this deductive or like inductive quality being labeled as a feminine quality elsewhere.
And she wants to go off with him right away. And
Bates still talking. She's like, "Oh, thanks."
Yeah, I'll take a ride. Sure, thanks. And to the ineffable disgust of Bates, who wanted to continue talking, who wanted to continue walk the entire way to the house and mansplain everything about this case that he has already figured out to this little woman detective. Well, let me tell you, I can go on for hours about how I've solved this case already. And they and she never does this. She never tells anybody that she has solved anything. She keeps it all to herself and lets it out when she needs, when she finally has the case already. So, and Sherlock does the same thing. Now I think for different reasons, or we could talk. I think Sherlock does it because he loves the reveal and he loves the theatricality of impressing everybody.
Yes, he's very
but I wonder if in this story it's not easy to read it as she's going to get shot down. So what's the point? You may as well complete the case and then present it. And Dyer's always ready to believe her at the drop of a hat, though. As soon as she says, and this goes across the stories, as soon as she tells Dyer, "I've figured it out," he's like, "Great, you figured it out." Like he knows, he can trust her.
Right. But she doesn't do that in the beginning because then we would have no story.
Yes. Sherlock would have solved this from Baker Street.
Yeah, Sherlock would be sitting down, like in his armchair, just like relaxing, and he'd be
Which is basically what she could have done. She could have sent a couple telegrams and figured this out.
There's no such thing as a lady armchair detective, though. I've read like every single one of these stories.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah, not one of them. They're all out there in the world. They're all disguising themselves as servants or someone's niece. Like, and I'm not being glib about the
Mhm.
fact that both of those exist in this story. They embed in these little invisible positions and they gather evidence. They're walking all about town. Richard March, who we mentioned earlier as the author of The Beetle, he has a detective named Judith Lee, who's a teacher of deaf students who speak sign language. And she also knows jujitsu. These stories were written in like 1914 and 1917. She knows jujitsu.
And she reads people's
Lips.
lips. She
Yeah,
can
she
read
reads
lips,
people's
and
lips.
this is how
I
she
mean,
finds out who's doing what wrong and finds things
exactly.
out about
I mean,
people.
like she can't sit down. She sees a suspicious conversation and then has to like go travel, follow someone, fence with them, fight jujitsu. All these lady detectives are on the ground. Not a single one of them gets to sit down and just spout the answer out and have it be taken as fact. It's fascinating.
Is that also transgressive behavior? Is that kind of scary to, people who might be a little afraid of women being capable? To the fact that, oh my gosh, I mean, she could just walk around and disguise herself, and I don't know what, and I have to be careful.
Think that's one of the reasons why these women are like are put in this profession and taken out of it so quickly. They meet husbands immediately and then they marry and they never have to do it again. There's this like
Mhm.
neutering, this neutralizing of women with this ability. But all of these women are bound by a sort of moral code. Like they don't go embedding themselves in society or lying, faking their way, onto steamships, pretending to be someone's niece or pretending to be a servant for kicks. Like they're doing this explicitly
Or
for the job.
proposing to other servants like
Right.
Sherlock does before
No,
to get
no,
information. Yeah.
no, they don't get carried away. Sherlock Holmes gets carried. I mean, yeah, exactly. And that's the Copper Beeches, right? Like he's,
No,
the other
Milverton,
one with
Charles
Milverton.
Augustus Milverton. Yeah.
Milverton. Sorry, the Copper Beaches is with Violet Hunter. Yeah, with Milverton. Like, there's no getting carried away. It's like we're doing this, we're doing our job. Job's over, we're not going to do it. In some cases, career's over because I've met any man and he's going to marry me. Loveday Brooke is very different, as we've said. But I think that in this regard, the lady detective is actually not very different from a lot of the male detectives outside of like the magazine driven detective story economy. Like the detective branch of the English police force was only established in 1840, with the police itself only being established in 1829. And there was an uproar about the idea that there would be these 12 plainclothes detectives walking around London spying on people. There
Yeah.
was this absolute unbridled panic. And so much of the literature that, surrounds that conversation sort of seems to exist to placate people. Like Charles Dickens is on duty with Inspector Field. He's like, nah, he's super cool. And yeah, he is running around London and he is like throttling criminals and doing whatever in the dead of night, but he's only doing it to criminals. And I think that's an undercurrent with these stories too. Yes, these lady detectives could be doing all of this stuff, but there's an understanding that they're not. And if they are, it's explicitly for a case, as I just said, but it's also only being directed at bad guys. So the good people of London have nothing to worry about. So this way, I don't know that it's any more transgressive than
Okay.
the transgressiveness of the
Of
detective.
detectives in general.
Yeah,
Yeah. So, I mean, we are by the 1890s, though, mainstream middle class society is happy with
yeah,
with,
they're
with
yeah,
the police force.
they love,
By this
they're
time, they're happy with,
they're generally yeah,
but they're
and
officials. They're official members of the police force, and private detectives are not.
no, there's a big difference. I mean, sure, I mean Sherlock Holmes stories represent one of the like undying conventions of detective fiction, which is that the police detective is an idiot, or the and the private detective is smart, and different stories negotiate with this because obviously people watch things like SVU, and Olivia Benson's been
Yeah.
successfully solving crimes for like 20 years, and she's not given that, but there are gradations of intellectual ability among the police that differentiate a good detective from like a bad sort of a bad presence, a violent aggressive, threatening cop figure as opposed to a detective who uses his or her brain. So like in the Sherlock Holmes stories, it's the private detective versus like Lestrade, the police detective.
Yeah.
But then like in Bleak House, Inspector Bucket is the police detective, and he is smarter than one of, Dickens's many idiotic beadles and constables like in
Yeah.
Oliver Twist,
Yeah.
So there are always these negotiations. There's for every good cop character or police detective character, there's always some sort of equivalent character who represents the establishment more and who is stupider. And that's Bates
That's Bates.
taking us back.
Um, well, now she's with Holt, though, and she completely uses her skill to bait him into talking about the maid, saying like, oh, suspicions frequently fall upon innocent people. He's like, yes, yes, let me tell you how innocent she is. And he goes through the whole thing and never mentions her name.
No, it's amazing. And she's
Yeah.
just like, it's almost hypnotic how she just pulls him out. He's not even like, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't even tell you who I'm speaking about. It's just, she just immediately starts responding to the information, and he's sort of inculcated in this continuing
Yeah.
flurry of revelations.
This is the first of two people she'll encounter now where she's able to master them easily and able to get them to tell her what she needs to know, and present herself in a way that they will tell her what
Right.
she needs to know. She leaves Holt and goes to the house, and then it's Mrs. Williams, the housekeeper, and Loveday, in the course of this easy, pleasant talk, elicited from her the whole history of the events of the day of the robbery, the number and names of the guests who sat down to dinner that night, together with some other apparently trivial details, which are not trivial details, and she knows how to get to the right information here. The Mrs. Williams talks about how the servants here are in a painful position, because they're the number one suspects. But actually, the Cuthrows here, the Lord and Lady here, are not. They're not lords. I'm sorry, but whoever they are, they are. Wait, are they? I can't remember. What's their title? Yeah,
Uh,
it is.
Lady
It's
Cutthroat.
Sir George and Lady Catherine, but not a lord. But they're actually being generous to their staff and telling their staff that it's, we don't suspect you, and everybody, and don't worry, this will be solved. But this all reminds me, this is again, servants are usually in the background of stories and don't matter. And I think specifically of Sherlock Holmes stories, the only time we really get servants is when Holmes is talking to them, grilling them, or
He's pretending to be a groom or something.
yeah, but then we don't even get those scenes. We get Sherlock telling us about those scenes. And here this is when Pirkis goes into disguise as one of the servants, we go with her.
Yeah.
He never takes us. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. I can't recall a Sherlock story where we go with him into it. It's always him telling Watson after he's already been in disguise.
Maybe when they're at the Copper Beach. I mean, maybe Hound of the Baskervilles when they're with the butler.
Hey, Sherlock's not in disguise, hanging out. Well, you'll get, but again, it's Sherlock talking to them or Watson
Right,
talking
right.
to them.
Think we
So
need
it's always someone is in authority over the servants in those situations, and here she's among them.
Right.
This is a whole different point of view for a story that we don't usually see in Sherlock Holmes stories.
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah.
And what she learns is not just the details of the case, but then she thinks that the housekeeper says everyone is suspecting him or her and trying to rake up past words or deeds to bring in as evidence. The whole house is under a cloud. And then Loveday's like, tell me about like the Christmas party. And she tells him about Harry Emmett dressed in prison dress with a bit of oakum in his hand, reciting the noble convict. Now, if you look at the illustration, you might think it's a clown. And he's not a clown. That's actually a prison outfit, and you know it because of the arrows on it. Where is it? Let me share that image. This is one of those little things that I've kind of learned from this. Whoops, went past it. There he is. This is Harry Emmett and this outfit. And I was paging the first time, I thought like it was a clown. And then you read it. Now he's supposed to be in prison clothes. I guess these striped socks could have happened, but really what gives it away is the broad arrow, they call it, which began to be used for prison wear in the late 19th century. The broad arrow. And and technically that broad arrow is a mark that would often go on goods dating back to the 18th century that meant that it's the property of the king. It's property of, the country, the king, and prisoners are property of the crown in a sense. And that's why they would have these markings on them. So there's Harry Emmett reciting the story, The Noble Convict. This seems to have nothing to do with anything, but of course it has everything to do with the case. This is her putting it. This is her making sure, like, this is what I think. And here, look, she's already seen the reciter's treasury, which we'll learn later, what she knows from that. And now she's getting, this is person who knows this stuff. And she finds out that he would flirt with all of the maids, but he was a sweetheart to none. He was the footman to Colonel James, a great friend of Sir George's, so he's a servant himself. But he's well loved. And that's part of that I want to get back to later. I don't think we ever get it. Is Stephanie in love with him? And did she help him get into the house? That's the question I want to ask at the end. Okay. We don't have to answer that now. Which means Bates is partly right in a sense, but I don't want him to be. She finds out that Loveday finds out that the Stephanie Delcroix is still in service. She's still working, but she's grown sullen. She eats nothing and never speaks a word to any of us except when she is obliged. So knows she's under suspicion. Is this what's happening here? She's very altered. Now Loveday Brooke asks to see the room. And when she goes into the room, and again, we get this other picture of, the scene of the crime here. First, we had to lead off the story. We have the window with the ventilators. And here we have, this is the safe. And you could just make out here, to be let unfurnished is written on the safe. But what's surprising to Mrs. Williams, the housekeeper, is that's all she looks at. She just goes in the room and looks intently, and she takes her notebook out. She's looking at the writing. She's comparing it to be let unfurnished to what she has written in her book. And that's all she wants to see. And then she says, okay, I'm done in here. And Mrs. Williams is a little surprised that that's all she wants to see.
She's not impressed, which is
yeah.
We know that's the wrong way to be.
And then she even says the gentleman detective spent over an hour in this room. They paced the floor, they measured the candles. First of all, Sherlock would have done that, but Sherlock also would have focused on the one thing that was most important. And I wonder, I can't help but wonder, though, the gentleman detective spent an hour pacing the floor, measuring the candles, if this isn't some small, maybe even unrealized swipe at the popularity of Sherlock Holmes, because he does this in stories, paces, measures everything, and then comes up with some grand thing like, this is what happened. This would be the parody, the satirical parody of Sherlock. And he does do that. But like Loveday Brooke, he also focuses, he knows what he's already solved something. He knows what he's looking for. And he'd be the one also being like, the handwriting here, let's compare it to something. So I think we get a little bit of both. I think we get a little bit of Loveday Brooke showing up, male detectives, and including, I think, Sherlock, and also performing in the same way. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, I think so.
I don't need to be fair.
I think it's a swipe, just sort of the male detective character in general, and then
Yeah.
Sherlock Holmes happens to embody it. But I mean, the point is that she's not like anybody else.
Yes.
A lot of these lady detective characters insist that the lady detectives are not like anybody else, borrow some of the quaint qualities, the women's intuition and the disguising as servants, etc., and then have the lady detectives behave similarly to male detectives. The story takes great pains to make a distinction between Loveday Brooke's methodology and the archetypical male detective, and I think successfully does through examples like
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. And then Brooke says, I'm quite ready to look at the room below. Her manner had changed from gossiping friendliness to that of the businesswoman hard at work at her profession. She's all about business here. And Mrs. Williams is just, she doesn't, she doesn't get this. She's offended. She had then asked for, do you have a country trade directory? She's like, what? And she wonders over the strange manners of the lady whom at first she had been disposed to consider such a nice, pleasant, conversable person. Because Loveday Brooke realizes if I'm nice, pleasant, and conversable, I'll get what I need out of you. And as soon as I get it, now I'm on the
Back to
case.
businesswoman.
Yeah. So I love that. She says, I must leave here by the first train tomorrow morning. It's like
Right.
Sherlock does this in stories. Like, oh, yeah, I'll have it. Oh, sure. I'll see it tomorrow. I have it solved already. They're like, what? What do you mean you have it solved? He's like, don't worry. I'll meet you tomorrow. I'll tell you the case then. So,
Yep.
Now the next what happens in the story is suddenly Stephanie Delacroix, the French maid, disappears. The And while everybody then, they notify the authorities, all she does is send a message to Holt, Mr. Holt, her jilted lover on the farm, giving him particulars. She doesn't notify anybody else about this. Of course, Bates has to come in and told you, and literally, literally, told you so, told you so.
Yep.
What?
Oh, yeah. Enjoy laughing now, Mr. Bates.
Oh man, and he's got this long paragraph about how he was right. And then it says at the end, and Loveday says at the end, what are you going to do now? Asked Loveday as the man finished his long speech. I can't tell you how satiric that sounds. It's like as he finished mansplaining. That is so dismissive to him after this speech. And that's coming from the narrator. I mean, it's our
Yeah,
point of
exactly.
view.
We know
It's
it's
our
long.
point of view, but
Right.
we get that. That's what's going on in this without it spelling out, without it literally saying that she doesn't agree with him, that she has any feelings whatsoever.
Right.
This is just subtext that you couldn't help but notice reading it. So they and she just dismiss. I mean, and it's basically by doing that she just dismisses it. And then he says, "Oh, what do you think?" And she says, "I'm relieved now." And she says, "Does it? I can see another possible destination for the girl, the stream that runs through the wood we drove past this morning. Good night, Mr. Bates. It's cold out
Yeah.
here."
Yep. See you later.
She throws out a little bit, and then just walks. I'm not, she just, I'm not going to deal with you, but I am going to tell you that you should be looking somewhere else, not,
Right. Exactly.
so, I don't know, even by the end of the story, we don't know why she comes up with the stream. but she's brilliant. That's why she came up with the stream.
I mean, how many times when we read Sherlock Holmes stories, we're like, okay,
Yeah, he just says, "Oh yeah, I realize that."
oh
Yeah,
yeah,
okay, yeah. There's no, we have no need for that.
let's just figure that out. Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of that in here in the whole anthology.
Well, she does let her Dyer, her boss, know that she sends him a wire, and she says, and the wire is cracker fired. I'm just starting for Rayford. We'll wire you from there, LB. That she has, and he says cracker fired was the easily remembered equivalent for clue found in the detective phraseology of the office. So they've got their own code here. Now Rayford, where Bates thinks that the train is because she must be going to, because it's just the stop on the line, and that must be where Stephanie would be running to. But it's also, we need to remember where the black bag was left
Right.
in the beginning of the story.
All gonna come back. The black bag is the best detail of the story.
Yeah,
It's
it's a true MacGuffin, right?
it's a true MacGuffin, and it's also, occasionally when you read a Sherlock Holmes story, you can intuit that, like, oh yeah, this woman was probably getting these love letters from her, stepfather or whatever. Like there's an assumption, but it's really hard to figure out what the heck is going on with the black bag. It's a true mystery for the reader.
Yeah. I guess it's not a true MacGuffin because it was only mentioned early. It's
Well,
not. It's not a MacGuffin because it's not the focus of everything.
no
It's
one's
almost like
yes, I
MacGuffin.
guess it's
Yeah.
it's not like we're hunting the stolen documents, but it has, it's sort of that MacGuffin like sheen, like it leaves, there's like something, and something ectoplasmic, like there are traces of it that
Yeah.
we can back up. Yeah.
A MacGuffin has to be the focus of a character's, and it's not really as important as they thought it was, but it ties it together. And this ties it together, but clearly not everybody. She's the only one who realizes what the MacGuffin is. That's what it is in this story. She's like, "That's the MacGuffin," and everybody's like, "What are you talking about? What's a MacGuffin? I've never heard of that."
How we focus.
Because Alfred Hitchcock didn't tell you what it was yet. Um, he did coin that, right? That is
Yes,
him, right?
yeah, that was him.
Where does that come from? I don't remember where he
I have
comes
no
up.
idea. I have a book on my shelf called The Film Snob's Dictionary, and I know if I stood up and opened it, it would tell
I
me.
wonder
But
where he comes up with that. I wonder if it's a reference to something in a movie of
is
his.
anybody in the audience now?
So somebody might know why that,
I'm gonna Google origin of the word.
just why he picked that word MacGuffin for it. But anyway, frequently in detective or suspense or mystery stories, there is this object, and this is at least for Loveday Brooke, the one that ties it together for her.
Okay, actually, no, we have a citation to correct. The term MacGuffin was originated by Angus MacPhail, who was an early collaborator of Hitchcock's. Hitchcock adopted it and extended the use of it. But apparently, sort of like an Eworks Disney Mickey Mouse, chicken or the egg. Angus MacPhail picked it apparently simply because it was a Scottish surname, but this is research by the seat of my pants.
All righty. Well, in this case, she has the cracker. And I like the idea here that like Dyer right away is like, wonderful. She's cut them all out this time. Like he knows she figured it out. My detective figured it out. And before all they did, and he's very happy about it. The event of the day, he muttered as he settled himself comfortably in a corner seat, will be the return journey when she tells me bit by bit how she has worked it all out. And that's what the reader's looking forward to as well, right? Like he becomes a Watson in this story, even though he doesn't narrate it, in that like he represents it like, yes, that's what we want. Could you please tell me? I have no idea how she's solving this case. This is not a fair play mystery that will develop later. This is like, we have no idea how she's put these pieces together.
It makes no sense. Yeah, yeah.
That she'll have to reveal the mystery of this, which is what that's the appeal of the mystery story,
Right.
according to Poe, and then that other people have adopted as well, is that, it's that it's when the detective reveals the process whereby which they solved it. That's what people really want in these stories.
Right.
Now that will change later with mystery stories, and people want fair play mysteries. People want to solve them along with the detective if they can, but at this time we're still just dealing with, I don't know how you could solve any Sherlock Holmes mystery or this or any of the others from this time. It just seems impossible. They never give you everything you need to know. What does? I think Silver Blaze might do that with Sherlock. Like you still need to use your imagination, but
I feel
some of
like
them,
it's obvious that the speckled band is a snake.
yeah, that might be that like we have all the information. Yeah, it is. Like you
Yeah.
have all of the clues, and then Sherlock at the end says it was a snake. He didn't tell you it was a snake at the beginning, but you have things that lead you to believe that it could be
Yeah.
a snake.
Maybe that one. Yeah.
Well, he arrives at Rayford and meets her, and she says it's all right, he can't get away even if he had an idea that we were after him. The police are waiting outside his house. We're going to catch him now. And they go and they arrest Harry Emmett at his place of work on the charge of complicity in the Cregan Court robbery. And he is such a cool you know, cool hand Harry here. Will someone have the kindness to fetch my hat and coat? I don't
Right.
see why I should be made to catch my death of cold because some other people have seen fit to make asses of themselves. He corrects Dyer a little bit later. Emmett the Irrepressible. It says that he's having fun. Now that's important because that's part of her figuring out what this is. Like this is a criminal that he's like, this is enjoyment for me. Now he's going to be in prison.
I mean, it's a game. We understand that it's a game between Loveday and various of the bad guys in these stories, including Emmett.
And we find out that he has they recover a third of the jewelry, and then they get all the other thieves because of letters and things that he has, and they can find them. And then so they get the other thieves and they get another third, but then there's another third that's never going to be recovered. Right. So you get this kind of you get this very important restitution of civic order. Thieves are caught, they're going to jail. Don't worry, everybody. But there's still a price to be paid. But the price is for rich people. So it's almost like I think like the readership is like, yeah, so what? So they lost some money. Like they've got back 2/3 of 30,000 pounds. 30,000 pounds. Most of the readers of the story will never see 30,000. Their entire life earnings will not be 30,000 pounds.
Oh my God, no. No, that's Mr. Darcy money right there. That's crazy.
So now we get on the train. Now it's interesting in the story as it was published. There's two illustrations that are flipped here. We get one illustration with him as the clergyman at the door, but it's actually the other illustration that comes later that should be here because this is Mr. Dyer found himself seated in the train facing Mr. Brooke, and I'm in love with this one because this is such all out to Sherlock Holmes here. Here it is. There they are, seated in a train compartment. Mm-hmm. Look at him here with this is Dyer. Dear Stalker, baby. I can't tell because of the print, but there's not he's not. No, this is just the back. It's not. But I almost thought like, is there a pipe?
No, it's his cuff. Yeah.
That's just his cuff. Yes. Mm-hmm. So, and here she is, all bundled up with her boa, looking like, now for today, you'd be like, wow, you look awesome. Their boa, that's flamboyant. I don't think that's flamboyant for this time period, but
it's not. But she's also, sort of concealed for us. I mean, the man with the deerstalker is the one. I mean, it's almost as if someone.
He's more in the light here, yeah.
Yeah, and she's covered. I mean, what it looks like is
they also both have lap blankets on. They're both
Do
covered in lap
yeah, he
blankets.
definitely did. Yeah,
Yeah.
fascinating. Well, I
Which is
mean,
normal for a train. It's cold. Yeah.
seems like it was designed though for readers who picked up the magazine, quickly flipped through it, saw a deerstalker, and to purchase it. I mean, like, there's something so Sherlockian about this. It's
Now,
not. It's the deerstalker. It's the two Confederates. It's the train car. It's the shading, the darkness, the detail. There's more detail in this illustration than in any other one. It's like, appealing to.
because this mirrors other Sherlock illustrations. There you go. Can you see that one? This is from This is from Boscombe Valley Mystery. Can you see that? This is the first illustration with Sherlock in a deerstalker. Because it doesn't say deerstalker, it's just a cloth cap with the flaps. So, but that's Paget knows what he's talking about. And here's Watson and Sherlock, and here's the one from Silver Blaze, which is the most famous. But they're in the smoking car here. Sherlock with his deerstalker and Watson, and talking about the case. Holmes gave me a sketch of the events, and then here's Hyam on his a little call out to it without clearly it's Dyer with the deerstalker here, because she can't wear a deerstalker. That would be ridiculous for this time period, but there they go. So this this illustration for me really says is that they're aware of Sherlock Holmes stories. They're aware they're writing within that vein, that Sherlock Holmes stories have become the kind of stories that you write. It's not like I'm not writing a mystery story or I'm not writing a detective story. I'm writing a detective story like Sherlock Holmes detective stories. That's what this kind of piece, this illustration says to me. It's a Loveday explained the whole thing.
It comes right on the heels of the publication of the Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, the serialization, and then the publication. I mean, it's just back to back.
So we learn from Loveday that and she even says detected. She says when she read in the newspaper, just like a lot of other people, the account of two things in the same people from the same newspaper on the same day, I detected, as I dare say, a great many people did not. Other people did not. A sense of fun in the principal actor in each incident. In that, in the black bag, although other people were reading it as, "Oh my gosh, this clergyman has committed suicide and left the bag," she read that as, "Yeah, no, somebody's having fun here," and we'll get to why she thought that. And also in the safe to be let unfurnished, she thought somebody's fun here. These two things happen within, hours of each other. This is the same person. It's her connection in the beginning. I cannot picture him at his work and she says, we are apt to imagine that the criminal stalks about the world with a bundle of deadly motives under his arm, and cannot picture him at his work with a twinkle in his eye and a keen sense of fun. And that's how she sees him. She went, as soon as she read this, she went to Scotland Yard to see the bag and its contents, and she traces the lines of the letter so she knows what the handwriting is. And she thinks the letter was to throw the police off the scent, and the letter that was intended to be pathetic ended in being comic. This is what she thinks of it. And then to be let unfurnished connected in her mind with this scene from with the dying kiss to my Marchioness mother. And then everything becomes clear because she gets this copy of the Reciter's Treasury, and in the table of contents is the suicide's farewell, the noble convict, and to be let unfurnished. And she's like, there you go. So, and then she goes to see Dyer. No, actually, she goes to see him before then, but then she gets the Treasury to, confirm her suspicions. So, and then when she goes now to piece it together, she finds out Harry Emmett actually recited the noble convict. So clearly that's the person She knows who did it. Um, Compares the writing, that even though it's, writing on the thing on the safe in chalk and writing this in a pen, it's not going to be the same. She finds enough similarities. She also notices that the other things written, the translations written from the clergyman, are not the same as the letter. So it's in the clergyman's bag. She could tell that someone else left that. And then she tells the story. And here's why this isn't a true fair play mystery, is that now she tells the story of the clergyman who presented himself, something she learned earlier from Mrs. Williams that she didn't tell us earlier, or that we didn't learn earlier in the story, is that a young clergyman knocked at the house on Christmas asking to see the rector, and this was apparently Harry Emmett in disguise.
Which we know he does because he was in costume when he recited
Yeah.
the.
And he gets into the house, and this is how he got in. And so, and then he leaves, and then he as a joke, he throws the bag there on somebody's doorstep with the letter in it to throw off the scent, but also as a completely away. He doesn't need to do this to get away.
He does not. He
And
is not a criminal mastermind.
this is what trips him up, is that he thinks, I'm going to play this little joke here, and it winds up alerting the one detective who knows how to read what's going on.
Presumably he's trying to distance himself from the evidence, right? So he does it, he just does it in a way that's absolutely
Because he
ridiculous.
thinks that if people connect the clergyman who visit, then now I'll give them an
Right.
explanation of what happened to that clergyman.
Exactly. Yes. Right. So yeah, if that's followed up on, the lead is dead. So it's, no, it can't be traced back to him. But it's just outlandishly done and stupid. It's
And she has figured this out, and Mr. Dyer drew a long breath. In his heart was unmitigated admiration for his colleague's skill, which seemed to him to fall little short of inspiration. By and by, no doubt, he would sing her praises to the first person who came along with a hearty goodwill. He had not, however, the slightest intention of so singing them in her own ears. Excessive praise was apt to have a bad effect on the rising practitioner. Now, what I like about that is that he doesn't gender that. He doesn't say that I can't give a compliment to her because she's a woman. She's a colleague, she is a rising practitioner, and it's a very professional reason for him at this point, because then he'll go back on it to not praise her. And I really like that about this story. And then he says, he just says, yes, very satisfactory. Now tell me how you hunted him down to his diggings. And she says, that was mere ABC work. Elementary, anyone? I wish she uses the cat. I wish she had used this again in other stories. I don't think she has. The ones I looked at, she didn't. But ABC work would have been a great, elementary
catchphrase.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a Pirkis notion. Needs a catchphrase, and you would have been more popular.
Catchphrase. I mean, like Sherlock Holmes already got the elements, so she gets the alphabet. It makes, it's good.
It was mere ABC work. And now she tells him oh no, well, she's already told him that she has solved this already. But and now after she tells him how she tracks him down, this is when Dyer's enthusiasm can't be contained. He says, it's capital from first to last. You've surpassed yourself this time. He can't, now I can't contain myself. Oh my gosh, you are the greatest detective I have. But she says, she's the thought of the possible fate of that poor little Stephanie. And you read the last paragraph there.
Okay.
We'll see if it's different from mine.
Loveday's anxieties on Stephanie's behalf were, however, to be put to flight before another 24 hours had passed. The first post on the following morning brought a letter from Mrs. Williams, telling how the girl had been found before the night was over, half dead with cold and fright, on the verge of the stream running through Craigen Wood. Found too, wrote the housekeeper, by the very person who ought to have found her, young Holt, who was and is so desperately in love with her. Thank goodness. At the last moment, her courage failed her, and instead of throwing herself into the stream, she sank down, half fainting, beside it. Holt took her straight home to his mother, and there at the farm she is now, being taken care of and petted generally by everyone, like a little dog.
She, yes, petted by
My
everyone.
dog heard me say the word dog. It was like, dog, pets. Yep.
And here's the final illustration of her. We get this, in a very dramatic scene here. Look at her footprints here to the edge of the water, and there she is lying in the cold. The So she's been saved though at the end. All right. What did she help Emmett?
Okay, I have an answer.
Okay.
Do you want to open it up to everyone too, or
People can say, yeah. I mean, you could say in the chat whether, because here's Bates thinks that she aided somebody in the house, and she knows this. So this is why she's upset now and then disappears. Now, clearly she doesn't disappear to go meet up with the criminal. So I think that might be in her favor, but that doesn't mean she didn't help him. Or did she just fall in love with Emmett and that's why she's overturned Holt? I don't know. I like, there's something missing here.
there is something missing, but I don't think it's guilt.
Okay.
Personally, I think she is innocent. I think she is given to us as a scapegoat. Someone in the comments pointed out that which she is, which is the true MacGuffin of the story. She is the missing piece, and she is the thing everyone's trying to follow. But the story might have its own true MacGuffin, but it doesn't have a true MacGuffin. Because Stephanie is also like, she might be the thing they're chasing, but like the resolution of finding Stephanie doesn't actually resolve the case. It just sort of is an incidental. And it's good because, Pirkis is a writer who's not going to let this like poor immigrant servant woman accused of a crime disappear without, a happy resolution. If anyone gets the happiest ending, it's little Stephanie. Like, she's doesn't die. Like, Tiny Tim did not die. We get, possibly.
Spoiler!
Sorry, guys.
No spoilers for Christmas Carol.
You should still come to the Ghosts and Monsters.
No spoilers for Christmas Carol.
Yeah,
We all
sorry.
know. No, I mean, there are no spoilers. Like, you can't spoil that story. It's not.
Little French Stephanie, who was not dead, was brought into the home of like the young, handsome man who loves her. But Stephanie's our scapegoat. She's our scapegoat because her hysterics are described both as hysterics and theatrical. She exhibits a very suspicious level of emotion to a point where people are like, this is a performance as opposed to a genuine display. There's a lot of anxiety in the Victorian era about like how the Victorian actress or how those inclined to act, those women who are inclined to act, are able to summon emotions for things that aren't real. And the popular theory is that women are able to play villains if they are villains in real life. Women are able to play virtuous, young, virginal heroines if they are that way in life. The idea that a woman's acting ability is not so great as to create a new persona on stage, but rather draw on something that exists within her. So that is a reference to like, the stage, and that Stephanie's tears are obviously performative, suggests that there's, something, inside her that she's trying to conceal. The fact that it would be labeled as performative is suggestive that it's not effective. But it's a sort of like a statement about crocodile tears that seems to suggest, if she's inclined to act, it's because she's trying to conceal her like villainous, association.
Yeah. Everybody posted so far agrees with you. Like, that she can do it, that he knew his way Emmett would have known his way around the house.
Right. Then,
She's
then
just
she,
acting rationally because she's under suspicion.
right.
Yeah,
And she ends up fleeing hysterically because she's like a young girl, and also probably because she's French. Like that's the sort of joke about including French characters. It's like they're the they're emotional and impetuous, and they're not governed by the sort of like the logic of like the well-bred English stock.
yeah.
She is, afraid that she is going to be arrested for a crime she did not commit. She is, a young, vulnerable woman in this environment. She's unmarried. She does not, she probably doesn't speak the language, fully, or it's not certainly not her first language. She might not have her family here. Like there's a way that she is so much more vulnerable than any other character. Um, and she goes to commit suicide because she doesn't want to be arrested. Like her virtue is what's under attack.
Yeah.
Her virtuousness, her honor, not her virtue, her virtuousness is what's under attack. And she's defending her honor the way that like wronged virtuous women do in Victorian novels, which is to kill themselves. Um,
And now
and
that
so
I look at back on the story from Holt, it's like it's not that she threw him over. It's just that ever since the night of the robbery,
right,
she refused to see me.
because she's so upset,
Yeah,
because
because she's
she's
so
being,
upset.
she can't even think about romance
That
because
makes
she
sense.
is a good honest woman, and she's accused of something so terrible, and it's eating away at her, and it, she can't, she a different kind of, female character would be able to continue flirting with, or entertaining entreaties, and I knocked something over with my wild Italian gesticulations, would be able to continue, entertaining the, interest from, all these, countless suitors that Bates insists must be calling upon her because she's so pretty. Like that is, a woman who is unbothered by the association of something criminal, or who doesn't feel saddened or determined to prove their true virtuousness, is actually a criminal in the logic of these novels. So the fact that she goes to commit suicide, she runs away. Yeah, she's innocent, I think.
Of course she's guilty. She's good looking and French.
She gets a pass here, the French thing. I mean, but that's Catherine Louisa Perkis's
But
interest.
it's
Like,
great that that, and I agree with you, and I think I see this more clearly now that um she has put this character in there who is innocent, and I guess in a sense, Loveday Brooke, the investigator nor the author, needs to show that she is innocent because she is.
she is, exactly. She is, and we just sort of know it. Yeah. And now, and now she's being taken care of. She's being petted like a little woolly horse, in in Holt's farmhouse, and
Yeah.
probably gonna get married.
Well, I like that. I mean, I continued to read Loveday Brooke stories. I read the next few, The Murder of Troit's Hill and Princess's Vengeance, Daggers Drawn, Red Hill.
Dagger's Drawn is good.
Yeah.
I love that one.
And Red Hill
Red Hill's
something.
good. Yeah.
Um, but and it's interesting. I Red Hill Sisterhood, and I find little things in each of them that are kind of almost, you know, that show that she's clearly aware of Sherlock Holmes stories, as anybody writing for these magazines is
Absolutely.
going to be, and saying things like, "Oh, well, of course you have to throw out the most obvious solution," and things like this, and showing ways that she looks at things differently than the official police force do. um and um as she continues to be this kind of character, this kind of, I'm here to solve a case because I'm really smart and I can do it, and then I just do it.
Yeah.
And there's no, like, at the end of the story, it's there's no raving by people that, oh my gosh, can you believe this woman did this? Like, Perkis doesn't have that stuff. It's just
Oh,
Dyer accepts her at the end, calls her colleague, and
right.
this is the reality for this character, is that
Hmm.
she's not being even he has a couple comments in it about woman, but he doesn't ever seem to judge her successes
Yeah,
in light of her being a woman.
right. Yeah, and as you know, Elizabeth Carolyn Miller, the wonderful scholar who writes about this, says that understanding Loveday Brooke involves not simply treating her as an incidental or the exception that proves the rule of a quote unquote vision of gender essentialism that was supposedly monolithic in late Victorian mass culture. Like the idea that Victorian women were expected to act like ladies all the time and couldn't deviate from these associated or like submissive qualities. Like, no, this is one of the many examples of the varied possible existences for women and female characters. And it pulls it off so successfully. It gives us such a clear example of a female character who is stripped of these these extra associations of gender essentialism, and contributes to our understanding of Victorian literature as being a lot more varied and
Yeah.
interesting, complex than we might have given it credit for.
Somebody commented, Lauren Ann commented, plus about Stephanie, plus if she were guilty, Loveday would know.
That is true, Lauren Ann. Oh,
That's very
yes.
true.
You know.
Well, if people can read, you can read more Loveday Brooke online. There's you can find all of these stories online, and there are editions. The one that you have, there's another edition that's available too that seems to be fairly accurate. But I'm interested now to look at the printed book editions and
Yeah,
see where they actually differ from the stories, as we have that one paragraph that was a little bit different there. So that will be interesting. I can't find there's no book copy online as there usually are on Google Books or archive.org, and I can't find a book publication of this PDF to look at, but I'll keep digging and see if I can.
British Library might have one that they can email over also. If it's scanned enough, comprehensively to
Yeah,
print, then it exists in a digital file somewhere.
yeah.
That would be my recommendation. Library to
Well,
library, you can get it done easy too. Like, so legit.
Olivia, thank you for joining us for this episode on Pirkis's Loveday Brooke. You will return for episode 32, as we're having two of these special episodes. We will cover the Lenton Croft robberies, the first story of Arthur Morrison's Martin Hewitt Investigator series, which was published in the Strand magazine, just like Sherlock, just after Sherlock. It starts in March 1894. And it's illustrated by Sidney Paget. So it's like Morrison's Martin Hewitt. The Strand was like, here's the replacement, everybody.
It's Batman versus Superman, everybody. Tune in.
And we can judge how well Martin Hewitt Investigator fills that role. And clearly Morrison's is aware, and he's like, he's a different kind of investigator in all these different ways. And you can find the PDF of that story on the Sherlock Mondays webpage. Sherlockians, I hope you enjoyed this special episode on one of the rivals of Sherlock Holmes, or the detectives of the Great Hiatus. Thanks to our chat, Mrs. Hudson Brianna, for managing the live chat links. Thanks to the sponsor of Sherlock Mondays, Lisa Washington. We couldn't do these shows without the generous support of our patrons. You can support the Rosenbach through donation. Your support helps us create more programs like this and also care for our collections. You could also become a member. Membership gives you early access and discounts to programs and courses. You can find out more at our website, rosenbach.org. And again, let me remind you to subscribe to our channel and like these videos. Olivia, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you, everyone at the Rosenbach community, for having me, and looking forward to seeing you next time.
Everyone, I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library, where the game is a book. Thanks all. Good night.